totally. Hey, all right, I'm going to try and get it right. I'm going to Zsuzsanna.
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 You know,
welcome. We were just having a bit of a conversation
good to see you.
Before you came into the room. Just having chats with a few people. Just saying, Frank. Hi, Frank. I don't know where you are, Frank. Marja. Hello. Mike, just come into the room. Just let people come into the room. So we were just talking around a writer called sorry, you can Ottilie, you could sort of just say a little bit more about
Gabor Shine.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in 1969. He teaches in Budapest. He teaches literary history and literature. He has always kind of been a dissident, but his career was forming right around 1989 is when he got started.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that since the advent of Orbán and Orbanism, he's been very firmly in a kind of dissident position, but I would say also living in a kind of internal exile. But as I said, it's kind of for any writer who wants to speak out very openly right now, it's actually quite dangerous. And also there are a lot of things that sort of go on in the background that are more subtle, in fact, that are not necessarily outright harassment, but because everything is linked into the Fidesz power structure, basically.
Thank you. I'm just letting people come into the room as they arrive. Good evening, everybody. I've just seen Becky and Mike, Alexandra. Hi, Grace. I can see you with your camera on.
Hi.
Oh, camera off.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi,
I've
Grace.
just turned it off actually, but I'm here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's great that you're here. Where are you? Where are you tonight, Grace?
I am in Bristol.
Oh, right. Okay. Welcome.
Which is not where I live. There's the backstory is a bit complicated, so just leave it at that. I'm in Bristol.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Hi. And we've got more Alexandra. Hi. Oh, we've got Morgana. Morgana, how are you?
A bit more light. Yeah. I'm fine.
You look like you're in some sort of spring setting.
Yeah, well, I've been doing spring equinox, of course. So.
Of course.
It was yesterday, but so blessing on you at the spring equinox.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Yeah. Well, nice to see you.
Nice to see you all.
We're just having a little bit of chat whilst people arrive in the room. But I mean, welcome to the European Book Club. I'll just make some kind of preliminary remarks. And we've been doing various book groups and book clubs, really, I should say, with various writers over a period of time now, just exploring latest books, latest themes, and what have you. And I mean, the idea is to, as we invite people to come and talk about their book, that we kind of spend about maybe half an hour. We've got some prepared questions, but we'd really like people to think about what they'd like to say, make comments in the chat, make observations, think about a question. When I've finished sort of putting my questions to the writer, I'm very pleased, obviously, to have Zsuzsanna here with us this evening. Really delighted that she could be here tonight. So the idea is to sort of speak with Zsuzsanna for about half an hour with some prepared questions, but get ready with your questions when you're ready. Please, if you can, put the camera on, because it's kind of nice if people like that. Some people don't. And kind of, oh, somebody's put the camera on. That's always nice. But you know, if you could keep yourself muted until you have your question, or you want to make your comment in about half an hour's time, if that's okay, on that. So without further ado, I just want to talk about Zsuzsanna, and I'll put something in the chat, and this is from I think the publicity material relating to your latest book, which in fact it's your first book, really, isn't it, Zsuzsanna?
Yes, the first book.
Yeah, first book. So I was coming at the latest book. It is your first book. And Zsuzsanna is the program director of the CEU Democracy Institute. Oh, somebody's got there. Needs to just mute there. And was a leading member of Orbán's Fidesz party in its early years. And she has witnessed firsthand the party's shift from liberalism to populist nationalism. As I say, I'll put a link in about Zsuzsanna and also about the Institute. And actually, Zsuzsanna has just showed me her new website, and I'll put that link in too. So she offers in her book an insider's account of Fidesz's evolution since its creation, and explains how the party rose to leadership of the country under Orbán and made sweeping legal, political and economic changes to solidify its grip on power, and from reining in the public media and to slashing the number of parliamentary seats. She answers a key question in the book: why has Orbán been so successful, winning widespread support within Hungary and wielding considerable influence in European politics? Obviously, we're a European network focused on religion and different beliefs, and the influence of Hungary in recent years has really worried a lot of us in the network. I think the book is underpinned very much by Zsuzsanna's own experiences at the heart of Hungarian politics. And the book is called, as we profiled it, the Tainted Democracy, Viktor Orbán and the Subversion of Hungary. So it's a hardback at the moment. I'm sure a paperback will emerge in a few months' time. It's had, I think, pretty rave reviews. I was talking to Zsuzsanna earlier today, and she didn't know about one of the reviews from the Times Literary Supplement, which is a really extensive review in January, which is a whole page on the book, and called "The Bad Boy of European Politics." That's their headline on that. So it's had really good reviews, and people saying it's a vigorous account of how Viktor Orbán has bent an initially liberal party to his will, and how he has subverted institutions and created an illiberal state. And we'll be talking about that over the next half an hour. So the book is 359 pages long. It's got 62 pages of extensive notes. I was looking through that. And it has an introduction and 11 chapters. I found it a really good, easy read. And so for those that haven't read it yet, and I can put a link again in the chat to where you could buy that from the publishers. It also has a very good list of abbreviations at the beginning, Zsuzsanna, which is always useful, especially for those that are unfamiliar with Hungarian politics. So I'm going to start off with a question to get this going. Can you tell us about your involvement in Hungarian politics? And I understand it goes back to 1988. So you just tell us how you got really involved and your background in all of this, Zsuzsanna.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. It's really cool to talk to you, and I'm very curious what you want to know more. So I tell you a couple of things that Mark thought is interesting. So first of all, I was a university student in 1988 in Budapest. I studied psychology, and I met I am from the countryside, so I'm from an intellectual family, not from Budapest. So when I got to the city, it was really a dive into actually quite an interesting period of late communism. We didn't know that time it would be late, but that was actually the dissolving already a liberalizing of the system. So there were a lot of little clubs and university circles and talking evenings and book readings from the opposition, which I joined very quickly. I didn't know that before that this was existing, so it was a revelation. And And through these opposition groups, I got in touch with a bunch of other university students from a law school and other specialized colleges, who then established a youth organization called Fidesz, which means Federation of Young Democrats. So I joined them in the first couple of days when this organization was established. It was very cool because it was a youth organization. It was not possible to make parties back then, but it was very political. So it was absolutely clear that it has a political ambition, which meant in '88 more liberalization and potentially multi-party democracy. There were many other organizations actually at that time, various historic groups and intellectual groups and kind of core type of trade union type of organizations. So there was a kind of emerging scene of civil society, I would say, with a political profile. There were green organizations back then, so there were quite a lot of interesting things happening. And following actually the Polish example, where there were big problems already with the Polish economy and some demonstrations, and there was an opposition in Poland. So we basically followed what the Polish were doing because they were better organized, and we started to come together with these other organizations, creating broader opposition groups to make pressure on the regime. So that was a generic opposition in the making in the late 80s. And Fidesz was a fascinating organization with a lot of young people, very conscious. We were already a generation traveling abroad in the West, because that was possible for Hungarians. So we really had an idea, at least we saw it better. So, but we thought we had an idea about what democracy is about. So this is how Fidesz was established. And I was in the core of the group. I was elected very quickly as a member of the leadership. There were very few women, obviously, still very few women in Hungarian politics. And well, I was doing fascinating organizational work. And when the Berlin Wall came down and there were roundtable negotiations in Hungary, which I explained more details in the book, but it was so long ago that probably doesn't make sense to go into this. But I got into the parliament together with the Fidesz party. And we were all young. Everyone was around, between 22 and 32, something like this. And it was really a fascinating group of people. Very conscious, very strategic, very political, very centrist, very liberal, and even green, if you can imagine something as a kind of green in the late 90s.
So it was quite a magical moment, really, was it, in the 1990s, in terms of a bit of a new dawn then, in a sense, was it?
Absolutely. I mean, this was a time when we, especially when the whole region started to move and then the Soviet Union collapsed, we knew every day that this is history. So it was a very fascinating experience, and many other people also felt this. So not only the couple of thousands who made actively politics, but a lot of people in civil, that there were in the 90s, it was thousands of civil society organizations. It were just mushrooming, and self-organization and local municipalities, a lot of autonomy, a lot of independence, and of course a lot of turmoil, because of course the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc was the reason, and also followed by huge economic crisis. So obviously this was a huge liberalization, a big opening, but it was, for the society, it was quite a difficult experience all over in the region. So
it's quite a time of some optimism and maybe some youthful engagement with politics that you were party to. Was Viktor Orbán, he was absolutely part of that? He was obviously a younger man, and was he a friend at that point? in you know, when you were, you know?
So we were all very close and spent a lot of time together. We basically, you know, if you are starting a movement, you are together day and night. Well, probably Orbán was not the closest person to me. I had other bunch of people, and later it actually became you know, probably his style was a bit too radical to me all the time, and he was always too macho with all those football fan stories. I mean, he was a big football fan ever since I think he was like 3.
Right.
So it was a bit too much for me. But of course, he was very talented, very strategic. He was an important figure, though he was not the leader of Fidesz at the beginning. And this is a part of the story that when we were already in parliament, which is a huge difference from, you know, being on the street, and you have resources and you have status and you have power, then Orbán and his circle realized earlier than others that this is power, and starting to, you know, collect more resources and people around him. He was much more conscious than some others, like for example me, who thought it was a fascinating time, and probably I was more naive than him. So this strategic differences and personality differences become very clear in 1991, 1992. Right. So quite early, actually. Yeah. Yes, and also how Orbán started to manipulate the decision-making circles of Fidesz party, the parliamentary faction, the presidency. So we had very, very serious debates already in those years.
Yeah, I mean, in the TLS review of your book, it says that after Orbán's landslide victory in 2010, wasn't it? Hungary has been on an anti-democratic journey, and this is a quote, obviously from that review. Hungary has become the bad boy of European politics. What can you explain about that? What's your feelings about where we've arrived on that kind of image that Orbán has, obviously within Europe, and what he's done? And this idea that, because he's stated it very publicly, you talk about it a lot in your book, that he wants to create this illiberal democracy, you know, and he's set up to do that since 2010, hasn't he?
Well, this is quite a big leap from, you know, from the mid-90s to the 2010. I left Fidesz party with many other people at 1994. So there were very serious strategic differences in the party. And at some point, Orbán decided that there's more room for the party to grow big on the right. So the big first political move he made was not in 2010, but in the second half of the 1990s, when he decided that this party should not stay in the middle, but on the right. And by the time he became the president of Fidesz and centralized the party very quickly, and he started to push out his critics and people who disagreed with him. So he actually had quite an autocratic style when he became the party president. So, and many of us left in the mid-90s because of his style and because he changed the ideological profile of the party. And this is interesting also to understand him today, because he completely reprofiled the party from liberal and greenish, you know, party to a rather conservative party, because he needed to consolidate, or he wanted to consolidate smaller right-wing parties, which were much more conservative than Fidesz. And also he wanted to take over their fellows, their voters. So very consciously, they become Christian from one day to another. Like Orbán, he baptized their children. He started to go to church. A lot of other people in Fidesz started to go to church. Suddenly, they all become believers.
Right.
So the relation, I think it's very important that they did it for political reason. And it's also important of how they use Christian democracy today. And they also started to get together with conservative intellectual circles, and they started to use a very nationalistic language, political language, which was absolutely different what Fidesz did just a couple of years earlier. So this big shift has happened in the second half of the 1990s, and by 2000, Fidesz became the leading party on the right. So he is someone who is able to do this. Of course, in the 90s, as I said, it was very turbulent period. So there were not so, I mean, voting bases were not so structured yet. People were changing what they thought about, parties were coming and going. So it was somewhat easier than it would be today. But even then, it was really a radical change. And Orbán was ready to do this, to use all kind of opportunistic ways to do this, to build up a new narrative, a new ideology. He professionalized the right wing and modernized the right wing, and so this was really interesting. Still, in Hungary, this period was actually quite nice, and it was a really democratic and very flourishing democratic period. I think until we got into the EU, so the early 2000s were still actually pretty nice period and politically very balanced. While Fidesz moved to the right, there were the other liberal parties, social democratic parties. So the political arena was pretty well balanced. And it was actually, he started to polarize this. And the Hungarian electoral system is very majoritarian. Most people do not know this. But we have constituencies, and it's a winner takes all system, basically. So it really benefits the big parties. And over the time, the bigger parties got bigger and the smaller parties were shrinking. And this is how Orbán could win so big in 2010, because it's winner takes all system. You can actually win big. And some of you who are Americans or British, you know this, because it's not a very proportional system. So this is how it happened. And Orbán lost elections several times before that, though he had a very strong base, this very national, basically built on nationalism. And I think he decided that he's gonna keep this, and he even made it clear to his followers in a closed room speech that they just want to win once big, and that's it. And they started to change the legal framework of the country right after 2010. It's also important to say that they got not just a simple majority, but they got in 2010 a supermajority, which means that 67% of the men in parliamentary mandate, though they only had half of the votes, but they had supermajority, 2/3 of the mandates, so they could even change the constitution. And they started to change the constitution. They actually made a completely new constitution, and they changed this constitution 11 times ever since. So this is the pace, how they are reshaping this country. Even, the legal format of the country is keeping the democratic facade and institutions of checks and balances, but it's all hollow. It's all working for them. It's all Orbán's cronies who are maintaining this or who taking these positions. So basically, there is a quite clear philosophy behind, and this is a different philosophy than liberal democracy. They have an idea of state, which is actually from Carl Schmitt from the 1930s, a German political philosopher, a very controversial figure in the Nazi era. He basically described a different form of democracy where there are elections, any kind of election, So there's a legitimacy of the government, but when it's on power, it must have every force and power in its hand in order to shape the country. And everything what we in liberal democracy now believe is a value is not a value according to the Schmitt's theory, which is the basic idea of Orbán. So this is the reason why they basically push down the civil society. They only, select a couple of NGOs which are actually serving the state for various reasons by their narratives, or like the big families, associations of big families, which my mother was a founding member, but several other organizations. So what the state party, which is a state party now, is useful. They support them with huge funds. Also, they support incredible lot of funding. The churches, the school system is completely backsliding, but there are more and more church maintained schools which get like several times more funding from the state. So a lot of students go to the state, the church schools. It's a very bizarre system. And of course, they believe the media should serve the state. So obviously, it's a very peculiar understanding of freedom of speech. They use the public media as a channel of the governing party, and even financing small and medium enterprises and big companies. It's all politically. It all serves to create a big power, economic and political power around this big party, and everything what supports this they finance, and nothing what is actually serving this they support. I'm not sure they are specifically pushing down, at least not violently. There's no violence in this system. This is the kind of 21st century autocracy. You don't need to use violence, because if people don't revolt, if you can serve the people with a kind of good life, and you can feel like this is normal, this is normalcy, then you don't need to use violence. And because in modern campaign technology, you don't need to have a majority of the votes. Let's say in the Hungarian system, but I think it's true in all other countries. In order to get to power, you need approximately 30% of the votes, of all the votes. And with 30% of the votes, you can get a majority. If you have more than 30, let's say 45, you can have a supermajority. So no, they don't even need to, they only have to mobilize like 2.5 million people in Hungary. So anyone who is aware of professional politics, 2.5 million people is really not so much. You can basically target them in modern targeted media technologies, almost person by person, especially if you are so powerful state actor and you also have a lot of data. I mean, it's just really an unbelievable power.
Well, it's all very dark, isn't it? And that, I think, it's really given us a sense of what that illiberal democracy kind of concept feels like. I was quite taken by the book, and we spoke earlier today about also Orbán sort of using this exceptionalism, the sense that Hungary's, kind of exceptional, which is, somebody that wasn't steeped in Hungarian history or anything. That seemed quite a surprise to me, how that was being used. But yet that's quite a powerful narrative now in Hungary, isn't it?
So obviously, Orbán is a very he's a very potent politician. It's with a big experience. So I spoke already about how he used the state to serve his power, but and also to incapacitate a viable opposition. But it's you also have to serve people with ideas. He actually said several years ago in 2009 that you need 3 things to maintain your power as long as you want. It's money, it's ideas, and votes. So this is what he is focusing about. So obviously ideas and ideology are very important. And as I said, they already, I'm sorry.
Oh no, do have a drink. Yeah.
So the nationalism was used already. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Do take your time.
Yeah,
We can all take a sip of our own tea or coffee or water or
yeah, just a
or
minute.
wine or whatever what takes your fancy. Oh. You better.
I try to continue, but probably I have to I have to speak less.
Mhm.
So ideology was always important for Fidesz party. They started with nationalism, and Hungarian nationalism is traditionally exceptionalist. It has various reasons. Why is it? First of all, Hungarians are a people which is very unique, and we have very few relatives. We have a language most people in the world have nothing to do with. We are hardly understand anyone, and no one understands us. So we have some relatives with the Finnish and the Estonians, and that's it. And so we have a language which is very special. And we live in a big environment among German people and Slavic people. So this was always a kind of, uniqueness feeling. I think specifically since the 19th century. So I think it was very important in nationalism. The other thing is that Hungary was quite a big country before. And until the First World War, Hungary was a big kingdom. And in this kingdom, if you see a map of Europe in the mid-19th century, you can see that Hungary was a very significant power. Now, of course, this country was for hundreds of years, and half of the country was under Turkish Empire, under the Ottomans, for 150 years. And there were then the Germans.
Oh, yeah.
The Habsburg took over. So this was a big kingdom, but for 500 years, it was not really autonomous. It became, in the middle of the 19th century, with the bourgeois revolutions, which came together with an independence fight. This is actually when Hungary got to the point, specifically with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, that Hungary got back some kind of sovereignty. And the other thing is that this big country, there were a lot of people there. So only, let's say, in the end of the 19th century, 1/3 of the population was Hungarian, and the 2/3 of the population were either Slovaks, Croats, Romanians, Germans, all kind of people. And but the Hungarian was a dominant ethnicity. And the Hungarian aristocracy, which led the country until the war, was not too positive to the other people. So actually, after the First World War, when basically the Austrian-Hungarian Empire collapsed, then all these people wanted to make their own countries, or they joined, like the Romanians, to Romania. And basically, Hungary remained small. And since the Versailles Peace Treaty was even very tough on Hungary. So even we lost Hungarian ethnic populations into our neighboring countries. So ever since nationalism in Hungary is exceptionalist. But this was a complete taboo, not only during communism, but also in the 1990s. So because during the joining to the European cultural environment, nationalism was not very accepted. So the thing that nationalism is revived basically the last 10 years is what you are saying about. It's now it's cultural. We don't use ethnic nationalism any longer, because the thing, this exceptionalism is the important thing, and nativism, and which comes together oftentimes in other countries with racism, xenophobia. In Hungary, it's anti-Gypsyism, or other countries in anti-Muslim political activity. So this is all the same root, which basically is exceptionalism. And the big thing now, this, like unlike 100 years ago, is that no, it's universal. You don't have to hate your neighbor country. It's not chic any longer. It's not possible. It's completely, it's completely taboo. You can hate other people who are more different from you, who are from other continents, who look different. And you can build the same exceptionalist ideology at a different and more universal level. And this is how basically Orbán's logic and ideology can meet Trump's ideology, or whoever, basically Bolsonaro, or whoever, Vučić in Serbia, or Erdogan in Turkey.
Mm-hmm. Zsuzsanna, you've done extremely well to get through that. I thought we were going to lose you halfway through. I mean, I think it's very interesting to sort of really to reflect on the taking up Christianity, because you thought there was some more votes in it and everybody marching off to church. So I've got that image in my head about that one as well. In the book, there's one of your headings was anti-immigration with no immigrants in sight. I think that's actually the heading in one of the chapters. And I suppose I was, we follow these things very closely in the network around this. So is it all around misinformation campaigns? I mean, some of the things that you've already said seem to suggest that's very much the case, and it has a resonance really with some of the Hungarian kind of, kind of psyche, really. I think that you were touching on there. And do you see, and I think you do within your book, you see that a lot of Hungarians, probably the minority, buying into that great replacement theory, those conspiracy theories that have come from some of the people that you've mentioned right now. So is there, at this time, after so much misinformation, so much campaigning, and there was a 2015 kind of refugee crisis, wasn't there, around Syria, which Orbán obviously made a lot of. Is there a kind of firm anti-migrant, anti-refugee feeling in Hungary, which Orbán has obviously helped create, or has been instrumental in creating, and he's just maintaining that because he sees that, again, a bit like, getting in a bit of Christianity, he sees that as being, efficient to getting in the votes. As you said, he's three things.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Hungary, like most Central European countries, is typically an immigration country. So over the time, people typically leave this place, for various reasons, but it was a very turbulent 20th century. So there were several moments when people just flew out. And also because of communism, these were very homogeneous societies. Let's say there were no migrant workers in big numbers. from other countries, or especially not from other continents. There were foreigners coming in, like students, and they stay there. So there were a couple of thousand, but it's just completely different scale than in Western Europe. Let's say neighboring Austria, where I don't know, even 5-10% of the actual society today was born in other countries, or their parents were born in other countries. Well, this whole post-communist Central Europe is very homogeneous. It's all white people. If you come here, you see only white people in the street. So that is the first thing. So migration was a non-issue. It was a non-issue. Basically, out-migration was always a problem, because of course the better skilled and better educated left all the time after 56, after the war in the 80s. But migration was actually a non-issue. And this is why it was quite fascinating when in 2015, much earlier than actually the Syrian refugees started to come through the Balkan routes and crossing Hungary, Orbán started to speak about anti-Muslim talk. And I was wondering, I was in parliament then, I was really wondering, what on earth is this guy doing? He went to this big march when there was a terror action in Charlie Hebdo in France in 2015 in January. And then a lot of journalists died, you might remember. Mm-hmm. There was a big march in France, when Paris saying that we don't let our values, we want, we are Republican. Orbán went to this march, and when he was coming home, he gave a press conference and he said, "Until I am prime minister, no migrants will be settled in Hungary." And this was months before everything started, so it was really spectacular. So he basically realized that there is a huge opportunity for mobilization in the anti-migration talk, which was just, as I said, a non-issue before. But, anti-Semitism, open anti-Gypsyism, and this kind of thing is really not very PC in Hungary. The very extremist groups are doing it, but Fidesz never did it, because it didn't, especially anti-Semitism, they are very careful about that. But there were finally some foreigners, migrants. No one ever knew them. They were completely new. You could say anything about them because people had no idea. So this was a fascinating moment to introduce a new narrative. And with this talk, basically Orbán's party undertook the then existing extreme right party from the right. So they started to use such a right-wing narrative. It basically was a big move to the right. And this is very typical for Fidesz, and because that time his popularity was really vanishing. There were a lot of problems around. So he started to use a new narrative. It was really an inside story. It was not an international idea originally. He just wanted to take back voters, or he wanted to take voters from another right-wing party with this. And then he realized that this is working so well. And he was able to make a coalition with other Central European countries. The Czechs, the Slovaks, the Polish were all rallied behind Orbán, because they also didn't want to have, Middle Eastern refugees in big masses in their countries. So he was able to make a coalition around that. So this was the spectacular result, political result, what he could manage. This is why he became kind of negative hero in Europe. Plus, on the other hand, he was very well serving, like Germany or other countries, because he built this wall, and he could put things into action very quickly, because he has a power in Hungary that he can basically do without any opposition, whatever he can. So he became a negative hero, and then turned to be a positive hero, because actually all other European countries also made their laws more strict towards migrant. So he was also very useful for a lot of countries, and this was one reason why he was basically used by other. He was so radical that compared to him, everyone else could seem a decent politician. So it was quite a spectacular move. And just to answer your question, it was a disastrous influence on Hungarian society, because this rather, neutral people with this incredible conspiracy theory campaign, the big replacement theory, which was basically behind this whole, it became, a lot of people believe. I don't know how many exactly, but basically the thing that you have to watch migrants because they are, the others. It's now deeply engraved into.
It's deeply ingrained within society.
Yes, and this is an issue in whole Europe. It's a problem. It's a problem in the entire Western world. So it's a story which will not leave us very soon.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Maria, who's just been working quite a lot elsewhere in Europe with refugees, as a question on this. Maria, can I call you in to put your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually like to ask. It's very much related to this topic. Because you were mentioning, Zsuzsanna, the few NGOs that are allowed to work with the state, and I was also wondering what's the situation of the criminalization of solidarity, especially against movements on the Balkans that support people on the move and asylum seekers. I was just now volunteering with an association that started in 2015 after the closure of the Hungarian border, and I was also wondering if Hungary is held accountable in regards of this violation of human rights at the borders that so many movements have been gathering, including sexual abuse, police brutal violence, and beatings and starvation. I don't know if there is room in current Hungary to discuss those topics and also discuss the movements that are, if there are movements in Hungary supporting asylum seekers and people on the move in general.
Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
I followed very closely these issues when I was in Parliament, because I could go to all these zones and migration camps and every places. So what my impression is that the Hungarian government reduced its services to migrants. Actually, they closed refugee homes and basically made this country a kind of place where migrant doesn't want to come. They did not specifically attack migrant or the human rights violations of this kind. What you can realize that Hungarian border are everywhere in the Balkans. Just you don't speak about that because, for example, in Serbia or in other countries, the migrants are hanging around in the woods. There are thousands of people untreated. It's awful, but no one talks about that. It's a kind of non-story. No one. You are the NGOs are helping them. I visited some of these, kind of nonsense places. So because they are at the border and because there are guards, you can see them at some point at the Hungarian border. But I think that most of the thing how the Hungarian authorities behave are just they let them go. Either they stop them or turn them back, or they just, without speaking anything, let them go to the West. So they actually Hungary is still a transit country. We just don't speak about that. So it's not so much the human rights violation. What is the problem? The problem is the entire issue is completely unsolved. And that's a problem because, first of all, it's always perfect for political campaign, when there are perfect scapegoats hanging around. You don't speak about them now, but there is an opportunity to take a photo of some, bunch of Middle Eastern young boys making fire in the woods any time, because they are there. Not so much in Hungary, but some other countries. And of course, the whole process is completely unsolved. The EU is stuck. Nothing is happening. It's kind of secret, it's a hidden bomb. So this is what I think about that. And no one is speaking about that. But if you watch the Hungarian public TV, there are migrant problem every week. So Orbán is on low level. The narrative is always maintained. It's not so much. It's not other bigger topics now. Current topics are in the forefront, but this is at low level is there, so they can pull it out at any time. So it's a game. It's not so much that that Hungary specifically treating bad. I think they are just there is no idea how to solve it, obviously, from Orbán. I mean, he cannot say better than just keep them out. That's the easy solution of the right wing. Don't let them in, and then that's it. And this is what they do. So this is how I see it. And well, NGOs, I think it make fascinating work, and it's important to monitor and track human rights violations. But basically, entire political solutions must be figured out, because we are facing this problem and we just don't solve it, or we just don't solve it.
Thank you, Maria. Is there anybody else in the Zoom room at the moment want to ask a question? It's a chance to ask a question to Zsuzsanna. Anybody want to make a comment or an observation? Tom and then Ottilie.
Yeah, I'm sorry to join you very late. I'm an
Okay.
appointment in a clinic in a hospital.
Yeah.
I've not heard of everything. I've not had everything that Zsuzsanna's had to say, so I hope my questions are relevant. I don't know what's there 30 years ago now. Fidesz was seen as a very youthful and progressive force in Central and Eastern European politics, and Orbán was a key player in that. Friends and allies. I don't know all the names, but he was. But how did that change? That's my question. How did this progressive, youthful force in the whole realignment of Eastern and Western Europe at that time change? And my second question arises with his, I'm sure you've commented on this, I'm sorry I've missed it, is haranguing of Soros and all that implies. It's often seen in anti-Semitic tropes. But my query is, if that's the case, why have certain prominent Jewish Orthodox figures in Budapest and in Hungary looking in so favorably? I'm not questioning the analysis that you've given at the end. I'm just asking questions which look at the nuances about it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, we were talking about those days
You've covered that
at the beginning, but I mean, there's some really good questions there. Yeah, please, Zsuzsanna.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, first, I don't tell the early Fidesz story again, because we talked about that, and I just suggest you read the book, because there's a whole chapter about that. But yes. The thing is, very shortly, is that Orbán became a party president and the first faction leader. So he started to concentrate power in his hand very early on, and he pushed out his critics from the party in very aggressive ways. And he did it again and again. So basically, Fidesz was changing all the time. I describe in the book a couple of critical moments when he made a bigger shift. But, it was step by step. It took 20 years for him to make the liberal Fidesz to what it is today. But in between, there were several stages. And this is very important, because this is, in other countries, this is what you are looking for. You are not looking for like Orbán today, because he is really, after 12 years of superpower, it's just unbelievable power. What you watch in other countries in Europe is what happened in Hungary in the 2000s. How Orbán got to the position, what kind of language he started to use, how he used and abused, Christianity. I used to say it's Christianism, what he's doing. It's very prevalent in these days, because European society is very secular. I mean, Hungarian society is actually very secular. We are the second or third, least believing country in Europe. and still he can still do a lot of things, because there is an image about what Christianity is, which he uses in a way that is, he uses the hierarchy of the churches and some of the values like family and nation and God. These are the triumvirate, but he's completely excluding the moral value of Christianity. And he even speaks about that. He says that Christian democracy is nothing to do with the belief. But then what, So he uses a kind of cultural Christianity. And I think this is very dangerous, because this is now, it's happening in other countries, and especially by the extreme right. And a lot of people cannot make the difference. I write about it a little bit in the book, because this is one reason I'm so happy to talk to you, because this is an issue in every European countries. And I think the Christian democratic politics is in big crisis, because they are attacked in the heart of what they are saying, and then their story is abused. So the other question of you is George Soros. Well, Orbán is not openly anti-Semitic. I probably think he's not an anti-Semite at all. It doesn't mean that he doesn't use his anti-Semitic propaganda elements, which he does. But he himself, he's a super opportunist. He works with everyone who is ready to work and with who can make a deal with. So if it's the Jewish World Congress, then it's the Jewish World Congress. If it's the Putin, then it's Putin. If the German car makers, then the German car makers. I just wrote an article, and I think it's very telling that he's not pro-Putin. He is pro-Orbán. He wants to get the most out of everything for himself. This is what guides him. He is not for Hungary. I mean, obviously he says this is for Hungary, but it's basically for himself and his power. And this is possible only in Hungary, because he doesn't have a space anywhere else in the world. So anything what he does is only understandable. It's full of contradiction if you look at it from a normal person's perspective, But if you can forget this, it only makes sense if you analyze it, whether this serves his and makes stronger his economic, political, and cultural power. He wants to make a hegemonic state. This is the idea. And hegemonic state led by him, so not a hegemonic state led by someone else. So everything nurtures this idea and system. And this is the only logic that gives answer to any of our questions. Now, George Soros was threatening this, because George Soros is for open society, he's for diversity. He is supporting financially a lot of organizations which are checks and balances, which are critical, which are anti-corruption, and this is a deeply corrupt state. It's an immoral state. So all organizations with kind of moral, motivation or backup or integrity is dangerous for them, especially if they are open, and especially if they are networked internationally, because then they are more efficient than small NGOs in Hungary or villages, which can do no harm for him. So they just can really stay there because they have no harm. So this is the only reason he was fighting, and he is fighting against Soros because he finds him dangerous for his own power. That's the only reason.
Wow, there's so many fantastic, well, not fantastic things you're saying, but the things that you're saying are really, really spot on, really are, Susan. Sorry, Tom, did you want to quickly come back? Yeah. You're on mute.
I'll unmute yourself.
No, it's you need to
unmute yourself.
I'll try again. Thank you for both those answers. You're going to make me reflect on both those points. The one point that's interesting, I didn't know until you said it, that Hungarian you see is one of the least Christian or Christianized societies in Europe. And it's interesting for a country with so strongly, because I've been in places like Eger and Pate, in which the Christian history is woven into the nationalist rhetoric over the defeat of the Muslim hordes from the east. Okay. And I'm not reflecting on that, but I'm sure that Orbán taps into this in terms of the Christian nationalist mythology. Mythology is used in a neutral sense. It'll be interesting to see how that rhetoric, which is very Christianized, for better or worse, I'm not reflecting on whether it's accurate or not, I'm just reflecting on that, is used in a modern context by him or not. Does he avoid it? Or does he play into that? Or is he doing what you've just said, being very selective? He's one thing when he wants to be and not when he doesn't want to be. But thank you for both answers were very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Tom.
just one comment, because it's really interesting. I mean, Orbán is not even specifically anti-Muslim, you know.
Oh.
He says the Muslims live happy at home, just don't come here. So he goes oftentimes to Muslim countries, and he is a big friend of Erdogan. And he says, so it's again Orbán for Orbán, you know. He only wants to leave us in peace here. You just live happily elsewhere, but you just don't want us to do something for you. You do whatever. And he was also doing this because this is part of the cultural sovereignty talk, what he's saying. And basically this leave us alone, this is also a narrative what he's facing with the European Union all the time. You know, this is what when they say sovereignty, it's a completely abused term in their narrative. It basically means leave us alone. You know, give us the money and let us do whatever we want to do. And this is what they call sovereignty.
Thank you. Ottilie.
Thank you. Yes, I just thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to mention, in terms of just the previous question and comment, sort of to take it up, just the way in which, at least in my observation, during the years of the beginning of the refugee crisis, that Orbán very frequently blamed the refugee crisis on Soros and on Brussels, as if to say they're sending them here to attack us. And I think that there were many, many posters in the street to that effect. And a lot of them used anti-Semitic imagery, very reminiscent of the 1930s, of Nazi use in the 1930s. And I think, you know, one can say that probably personally Orbán is not an anti-Semite, but I just personally found it so incredibly disturbing just to keep seeing that imagery. And it just seems to me that it's awfully effective, that because he's stifled so much independent media. And I guess I just, you know, witnessed it again, just having been there briefly with the war and the invasion of Ukraine, that everywhere these huge kiosks with this so-called national consultation saying that he asked the Hungarian people, you know, do they want to fight for Ukraine or whatever they want to support, and 97% said no. And it's just, you know, it's just and if you, I mean, watch the media coverage, is the same, everything is nationalized. And I guess when you're there, it just feels so all encompassing. And just, I guess my question, which I would like to ask the author is, you know, it seems that like the EU is like sort of applying pressure, but like, to me, not enough. Or I mean, it seems to me the only, because so many people who can't stand it there just leave, like, I don't know, over 1 million emigrated or something, among them my friends. So I guess my question is, do you see an exit scenario for this at all? Because it's hard, unless the EU comes down really hard on him, which it doesn't seem like they want to, because it seems that German manufacturers have so many plants in Hungary and they like the low wages or whatever, I don't know. But do you see any exit scenario for this terrible illiberal regime? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ottilie. Really, really good question. I mean, a number of MEPs that we're in touch with are increasingly getting exasperated, and you'll see that in their Twitter feeds, you know. Zsuzsanna, is there hope? I think is part of that question, really.
Okay, super important comments. And just to say that I have a whole chapter about this propaganda in the book, which explains the story through the Soros thing. it was really sickening, and it's still sickening. I mean, it's hard to just to see all this coming again and again. And just for the others who don't come to Hungary, but there's this campaign, and there are left 2, 3, 4 campaigns per year, because this is also serving the media empire with money, with state funding. So it has 2 in 1, 3 in 1 purposes, but it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. It's just, you cannot escape it. It's from the radio, from the TV, on the streets. It's really a propaganda, as it's written in the big book. So, but I don't go more details, but I explain how the migrants insurers are actually, linked in this setup, because I find it really important. And because also this is something, it's possible other politicians also use it. It's not a technique, So the EU is badly failed with Hungary. I mean, it's 10 years lost now. Intervening somehow in 2012 would have made sense. It's almost impossible to do anything useful with Hungary in these days, and they have no idea. The problem with the EU that it's 27 countries, and there is not really one collective will of the EU. It's all the time. It's a legal organization, so what is legally possible, the EU is doing if there is a political will, and the political will you have to gather from 27 countries. And because Orbán's behavior was really the first, therefore the EU had very little tools and very little political will. And it's not only the Germans. I mean, the German Christian Democratic Party specifically made they have a historic responsibility for what Hungary looks like today, because they were so supportive for 10 years. And I think they will still have problems at home because of their own, right-wingers within the party, but that's another story. So the hope is always there. The most positive thing I can say was Orbán gave an interview a couple of weeks ago to very hardcore conservative journalists, and they were allowed to write about it. And he was speaking to them on Putin, about Russia and the war, and he tried to sell them his concept. And at some point he said that Putin has to watch out, because even manipulated elections can be lost. Now, so this is the thing, until there are elections at all, whatever unfavorable for the opposition, which is hardly unified, it's very fragmented, it's very small, it's in very bad shape. But there's always shape. Orbán is a charismatic leader. Now he has a big set of institutions in his hand, but if his charisma is broken, he can lose everything, just like most dictators usually do so. So now it's very difficult to see whether an election can create such a situation. Most probably, it's difficult to imagine. So some kind of, internal and external influence will shake this regime. And this will come because, first of all, we live in a very, rapidly changing world. Fidesz party, Orbán's party, made actually a lot of mistakes. So they take huge risks all the time. And oftentimes they survive because the opposition is not good enough to, in mobilization, because they are struggling for survival, basically. So I'm not so super pessimistic. I actually believe that this moment will come sooner than we think. It's a house of cards because it's kept together by, a lot of interest, a lot of money, and some ideology, obviously, but by Orbán himself. and if he's out of the picture, you know, they will kill each other. So, and then of course, that's not a very positive scenario. It's quite a chaotic scenario. So I just don't think that a post-Orbán world will be very easy in Hungary. But I also believe that, you know, big politicians come up in crisis time. So the fact that we don't see the challenger of Orbán at this moment doesn't mean that there are no very talented people in Hungary who are actually also good politicians. So altogether, I don't have better answer than this. The situation looks super bad, but I'm not. And the opposition knows what they should do. They don't necessarily can do this, but they are quite aware, as I was when we were. So, you know, organizing people, being present everywhere in the country. It's so they do what they can, and this will work at the moment when there will be the big moment is coming.
There's the hope.
Maybe
Maybe you can be the hope. I mean, you know, you came back, you know, with your party Together. It was called Together, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So maybe, you know, there's another opportunity for you in all of this, because
we'll see.
Yeah. Hey, Morgana, you had a question about, well, media. Yeah, your question.
Yeah, I was wondering about the situation now with journalists and freedom of press, of course, and specifically connected to Article 7. I'm not sure what the situation is now from the EU and the implementation of Article 7. So I know that was part of, you know, freedom of religion or belief and freedom of press. So what's the situation now?
Well, Article 7 is on hold. You know, there's you mean the EU process? Yeah, this is on hold, and I think, you know, there are other ways now how the EU try to make pressure on Orbán's party and the Hungarian government, and this is the withdrawal of a part of the funding, the reconstruction fund, the COVID-related reconstruction fund, and the next year transfers, which is a very significant money in the case of Hungary, and it's of course badly needed. And this is not only physically the money what is missing, but it's also this is a country which is very much dependent on FDI. So if EU doesn't give the money, it means it doesn't trust Hungary, and then the FDI is not coming, and that is what is an even bigger problem than the 7.5 billion euro on its own. So the media environment is very dire. There is free media in Hungary, and I can speak freely. I will see what it comes after, but there is free media. It just has very little outreach, and all the traditional media is practically in the hand of Orbán oligarchs. And the big new thing, and this is something I think also makes a lot of sense to follow, that like a couple of years ago, the opposition had a lot of opportunity on social media. Now the Fidesz party media conglomerate build up a complete social media portfolio and their own influencers who do not look like political propaganda, but they are. And so now we ought not even see a big part of, you know, these media tools. This is a development of the last couple of years. It's really worrisome. The EU has troubles to do anything with the media issue, because this is the problem with this is broader than Hungary. It's happening in every country. The complete media environment has dramatically changed. It's all, you know, the digitalization, artificial intelligence. So it's just such a big issue that I don't think they can have any idea how to touch this.
Oh, we're touching on some
Thank you. Yeah, I was just, I mean, I've been going to Hungary since about 2000, I think about 2003, and gradually it got more and more difficult. Certainly, at one point, I remember we had a tea party at one of the bishops. I can't remember if it was in Szeged or Budapest. I think it was in Szeged. Anyway, I went to his house, and he just literally said, you know, that Hungary was a Christian country, and Christianity was the religion of Europe, you know, and we were there as coming from a different secular background from the Netherlands, sort of biting on our lips, you know. We thought, well, we'll have a cup of tea first and then we'll run. But it was noticeable how the media seemed to be also, as soon as they were talking about, for example, the case of the Istanbul Convention.
Yes.
You know, as soon as you started, and of course they found in Hungary, they found real allies in Poland. But for many women particularly, it was really, really difficult to be free. And that's what I say, you know, what's the situation now? And especially things like abortion and what have you. How free are women allowed to express, you know, freedom over their own bodies, that kind of thing. So I was just wondering whether journalists could talk about these things freely without being chastised or you know, ended up in jail. And even worse, that women are going to be you know, gay people, you know, it's how free are you actually, or do you know, end up finding yourself in a kind of tight corner? I know, as I say, speaking with the bishop, we didn't really feel like speaking about other religions, simply because he was absolutely convinced that Christianity was, you know, the religion of Europe. So I find it really difficult to have any kind of discourse without really, you know, thinking, am I going to be arrested? Or
no,
it was very difficult. And I realized, you know, at the end, how it had been so much easier 10 years earlier.
Yeah, well, you know, in terms of abortion, Hungary is not in so bad situation than Poland. But Hungary, it's not a Catholic. I mean, majority of believers are Catholic, but the Catholic Church has never been so strong than in Poland, and did not have such a political influence. It's actually a built-up influence by Orbán now. But in terms of women, there is no much force on women here, and abortion is possible. It's slightly more limited than 20 years ago, but it's still reasonably possible. It is the narrative is what is really super bad, because, you know, the thing that Fidesz politicians say things like that we hope that the biggest achievement of woman life is having a lot of kids. So this kind of, there is a mental pressure on women, but it's not a physical or legal pressure. This is why I think this whole campaign against LGBTQ communities is really interesting, because against women, there was not much room in Hungary. There's more room in Poland, but it's, ideologically, but it's not so much in Hungary, because the Hungarian women, in one way, they are relatively liberal. You know, Eastern European women have been working for decades. You have to work. There is no possible to, you know, maintain a family for one salary. So all women are working for several decades, for 60 years. It's somewhat more liberal, but it's still a male-dominant society, and you can see that is in representative positions. There are only 10% women in Hungary, for example, in parliament. So this is slightly different. But the LGBT thing is a serious issue, and this is something which grew up very quickly. It was the anti-migration propaganda was at 2018, between 15 and 18, and the last year we had elections last year, and before 2 years before the elections, it was only 2 years until they created this whole incredible anti-LGBT propaganda, which is very similar to how it's kind of evolving all over the world. It basically pick up the trans people. So if you see the public opinion being gay, Eastern Europe is a bit more conservative than Western Europe, but not so much. But trans is the issue here. And they basically say that gender is the trans. They equalize, and they even mass it together, you know, mix it together with the women's fight, which is still is a very early stage in Eastern Europe. And this propaganda is absolutely universal of the right wing, and that sounds pretty horrible, and it creates an environment which is another, you know, conspiracy theory, basically saying that trans people, the Soros NGOs, this is all mixed together, come here and they will force your kindergarten child to change their gender. And that is what is now under construction. This is the new thing. And I don't think that this goes widely in the society, but because of Fidesz party and probably many other conservative parties are moving to the right, they have to have new voters because they lose the middle. So if they want to maintain their voters, the voting base, and they lose from the middle because of they are, you know, they more right, they have to, it's a kind of vicious circle of radicalization. And when this anti-LGBT propaganda, most of Hungarians are really not interested in, but this goes to these new voters of Orbán, who are really old, undereducated village inhabitants, and this is how the right is taking new voters on the edges. So this is also just modern campaigning. You don't have to speak to everyone. You know, if you can really target this propaganda to certain bunch of voting base, and especially extreme right, but also Trump was able to recruit voters who have never ever been voting in their life. So it's not the classic, you know, undecided voters, because undecided are regularly voting, but they just undecided. So they are not very active between elections. They go to elect, and they decided last week who to vote for. That's typical. And political parties try to figure out who these people are. This is the big match of campaigning. But what these extremist groups can do, they can recruit from groups who are the complete out of political environment. They have no idea of what is happening. They never read any newspaper. They don't even read the tabloids. They are completely uninterested in politics. So they are the target of the conspiracy theories. And they are everywhere. It's not a Hungarian specialty. It's everywhere. We know it from science that there is a bunch of people who, I mean, just look at the United States. I mean, complete nonsense. So there is always a public for conspiracy theories. Thank
you. Look, we're just coming to the last final minutes with you. We've had so much of your time. I really, really appreciate that. I suppose I'm still trying to think of a parliament, saying the parliament has 90% male MPs.
Oh, I think only 88. So don't exaggerate, please.
All right. I mean, that's not a, yeah. Look, you know, you talk about political tap dancing in your towards the end of your book, and the relationship with the European Union. That we've just been, you know, really touching on that. And I'm not sure how many people will know this, but Hungary is going to have the European presidency next year for 6 months. How do you think that's going to work out? And do you think that should happen really at this point? What do you think in relation Sorry, it's
I
a bit too
yeah.
late for your book because I don't think you quite knew that was going to happen. I don't think you knew it.
Yes, so but the last chapter of the book is about Hungary in the world and how Orbán reshaped Hungarian foreign policy, and this tap dance is about that. He basically, it's also very pro Orbán centric. He doesn't want to be at the periphery where Hungary is. He wants to be in the center. So everything is, Hungary is in the periphery, but he wants Hungary to be in the center. So in order to be in the center, he should open to the east, because then, you know, we are between east and the west. And this is his essence of his tap dance. I mean, it's very simplifying, but basically it's a kind of typical strategy for smaller state over the centuries, when there were the big powers and smaller people, you know, try to figure out whether they attach to one of the bigger powers or what to do. And the more risk takers were hanging around in the middle and try to get the most out of everything. So this is what, and Hungary did it oftentimes, and we always lose it. So we always lost. It never, you know, it went on and on for a while, and then we really lost a big. I mean, in 100 years ago, we lost 2/3 of our territory. So it's not a very promising strategy. And of course, I am, and a lot of Hungarians are aware of this because it's our own history. So it's really horrible to see this tap dance. So now your question. Well, Orbán will try to, I mean, I cannot imagine that Hungary will not get this position, like, you know, president of the half-a-year presidency in the European semester. It might be a discussion about whether this is possible or not to give it to the Hungarian government, but at the end of the day, they will give it because it's the rule, and, you know, there's not much legal opportunity not to have it. So Hungary will be the president the second half of the 1924, and a lot of things, how Orbán will behave, will up to how the European elections will be resulted, because the European elections will be on spring 24, and this is always a big opportunity for Orbán to make new allies in the West and other countries. So I think what I just try to figure out now, I'm speculating loudly. If I was Orbán, I would think that, okay, then it's the war. There will be a war fatigue. There will be economic recession in many countries and an inflation. So probably some right-wing parties come to power, especially that it's a European election. So, you know, there are smaller fringe parties have more chance than at the national elections. So he is looking at who is coming in, who is growing. And we know in the last like 2-3 European elections that some parties, some political groups from the fringes got stronger and stronger. They didn't get the majority, but they got stronger. So I think that's what Orbán is calculating. Probably he is making alliances already now. He is giving advices. He sends his people around in Europe. He's supporting, because he uses Hungarian, you know, public money like pocket money. So he spends a lot of money abroad for his own party's propaganda. This is working very well. It's tested in Hungary, so it will be, you know, it just needed to be adapted. So I think he will support a lot of right-wing parties, extremist parties, in order to make a stronger bloc. And then he will see what comes at the European elections. That will determine how strong he would be. This is one thing. The other thing, what will determine how strong influence he can make, is how the war in Ukraine is happening. And again, he is calculating here that, you know, maybe a Trumpist come to power in the US, then there might be less support for Ukraine. Western European countries will not be so ready to support. So he's watching. And this propaganda that he's doing with the war, which is, it's really very nasty, and it's a horrible spin that we want peace. We want peace. You know, this is something, it's very appealing. Everyone wants peace, right? He doesn't say how. He doesn't say that peace at this moment would mean that Ukraine should give up territory. And if they give up territory, then the Russians can be even further. So so he's playing with these options and various options, and I don't think that he or anyone at this moment knows how he might behave in that position. But we also know that, you know, this presidency, it's a relative power. So it's especially in a case of a small state, no one can make big changes if the European institution system is not behind and the other countries. So probably in case of Hungary's presidency, the Commission and the European Council will be more watching and careful.
Look, I would really recommend anybody that hasn't read this book to really read it. It does seem like it's a playbook for so many other politicians in Europe and across the world, really. And Orbán took to this earlier than others. He does see that. Sorry, and coming to the book club, he plays quite shrewd moves. I'm just wondering if there's a little bit of luck that gets thrown in with that, doesn't it? You know, the European elections, as you say, in June, and then that Hungary's scheduled to be, you know, so that's kind of, yeah, that's too close to comfort, really, in terms of luck. Look, my last question, really, for you, Zsuzsanna, and all your time. Your book isn't out in Hungary yet, is it?
It's coming in June.
It's coming in June, okay. So being translated into Hungarian. How do you think it will be received?
Well, like everything in Hungary, it will be, you know, divisive. A lot of people will be super happy.
Okay.
Because I think it's a good book also for Hungarians, and a lot of people will dislike it. And the question is, what do those people do? Probably some people, I mean, they will not read it, but they will still comment it. This is what I expect. And
I think you talk at the end of the book about your grandparents and parents and your ancestors wanting to live free and autonomous lives. And often suffering under oppressive regimes, you know, within. So there's that, yeah. Thank you very much for your time. I think thank you everybody for being here and the questions as well. We'll do a recording. We're going to take snippets of what's been said and use that for social media purposes. Obviously, give you the recording, Zsuzsanna. Maria up there is going to be writing some key information, particularly around migration. I think we might focus that on, but I think we've touched quite a lot on religion as well today and how that plays into the Orbán's scenarios. I've put it, we're going to Albania next week. Just wanted to let people know that, and talking with another author about the situation that persisted in Albania before the kind of collapse of communism, and then the period after, which has really been quite challenging. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We look forward, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how things progress for you personally, for this book, and you know, for your courage and bravery, you know, within Hungary. I think we all really admire that. You know, so keep in touch with us.
I can see that I didn't answer some of the questions of Tom. I'm so sorry. I just.
Well, there was one about Tom about was it about there was
Transylvania. Yeah, heroic figure. Yes, definitely. You're right. He regards him. I mean, he's opportunist, but he's also believed that he was born to do this. You're right, of course. And Transylvania. Yeah, no, it's not in the sense I think that how you would think. But we can discuss it.
I think Tom's using a Hungarian. Is that goodbye or thank you?
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was really nice to talk to you all.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
And I will be at a Hay Festival if you are in
yes. Yeah. If anybody in the UK or coming over to the UK, you're in the Hay Festival on the 27th of May, aren't you?
Yes.
We'll send the link around.
Okay.
We do an article.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ciao. Bye-bye.